Languages are always on the move. They're born, they mix together, they evolve, and yeah, sometimes they fade away. But here's the thing. It's not just some organic hands-off process. Oh no. Behind the scenes, you've got societies and governments trying to steer the ship, to manage all this change. And that's where we get to this really fascinating intersection of language and power. So that brings us to the big question for today. How do governments actually react when all this stuff happens? When languages are born, or when they get all mixed up, or when they start to die out? What role does official policy play in all this? And believe me, the answers tell you a ton about what a society really values. Okay, so at the very heart of all this is this core tension. And honestly, this iceberg metaphor just nails it. The part you see sticking out of the water, that's the visible policy, the official laws, the stuff written down in constitutions. But that's just the tip, right? The real power, the massive unseen part under the water, is the invisible policy. We're talking about what actually goes on in classrooms, how people talk on the streets, and all those unspoken beliefs about which languages are good or proper. And that clash, between the official rules and what people do, that's where all the drama is. All right, so let's see this whole tension play out in the real world. We're going to start with our first big topic. What happens when a brand new language is actually born? It's a process called creolization. So it all kicks off with something called a pidgin. Think of it as a super simplified makeshift language, a basic code that people invent just so they can trade or communicate when they don't have a language in common. But creolization, that's the magic moment. That's when that simple pidgin gets a massive promotion. Suddenly, it becomes a full, complex, nuanced language. It becomes the mother tongue for a whole new generation. It's not just a tool anymore, it's the bedrock of a culture. But here's the catch. For a new Creole language to really take off and thrive, it usually needs a little help from the top. And this is where that language planning stuff becomes absolutely crucial. It's kind of like a three-step plan. First, you've got corpus planning. That's where you standardize the spelling and grammar. Then comes status planning, giving it official recognition, in schools and government. And finally, prestige planning. This is all about building up its cultural cred through music, books, and art, so people feel proud to speak it. It's literally a blueprint for building a language.
And if you want a perfect example of this in action, look no further than Swahili. It started out as a creolized contact language right there on the East African coast, a mix of Bantu and Arabic. But then something big happened. A deliberate policy shift. After colonialism, governments in the region made a strategic choice to elevate it, to turn it into the common language, the lingua franca. And wow, did it work. This status planning wasn't just about creating a common tongue, it forged a super powerful tool for national unity. It's proof that a simple contact language can become a huge national symbol. Okay, so that's how new languages can be born and get official recognition. But what about the day-to-day reality for people who already speak a bunch of languages? Well, that brings us to the messy and honestly beautiful reality of how people actually mix languages. This is called translanguaging. I want you to just forget that old school idea of pure languages that we're supposed to keep in separate mental boxes. Throw that out. Translanguaging is what multilingual people actually do every single day. It's about using your entire linguistic toolkit, all the words, all the grammar you know from every language, and using it seamlessly and creatively to get your point across. This is not a mistake. It's not a deficit. It's a high-level skill, and it's the reality for millions of people around the globe. And bam, here we are again with that tension between policy and practice. Take Canada, for instance. The official policy promotes English and French as these two distinct, separate things. But walk around on the street in many places, and what do you hear? Franglais. Same deal in South America. Mercosur schools are trying to enforce standard Spanish and Portuguese, but you go to the border regions and Portuñol is how people actually live and do business. It's the classic battle, the classroom versus the street. And a lot of the time, the street is winning. We're seeing this exact same conflict play out right now in East Africa. The mixing of Swahili and English has created this whole new, vibrant urban identity, especially among young people. And this really forces policymakers into a tough spot. What do you do? Do you take a pluralist approach and say, hey, this is cool, this is the modern evolution of our language? Or do you go the assimilationist route and try to force a pure standard? It's a huge debate, and at its core, it's about what a language and an identity is even supposed to be. Okay, this leads us to our third and maybe the most urgent phenomenon of all. What happens when the mixing kind of stops and one language just starts to completely take over?
This is a process called language shift.
Language shift is really, it's like a silent abandonment. It's what happens when a community, usually over a few generations, discovers that it's just more advantageous or sometimes flat out necessary to speak the dominant language to get jobs and education or to climb the social ladder. It's almost never a big conscious decision. It's more like a slow, quiet erosion driven by these really powerful outside pressures.
And guess what often speeds up this whole process? Yep, official policy. Just look at how this image lays it out. The space for the heritage language just shrinks and shrinks, while the dominant language, which gets this huge boost from official status and being used in schools, expands and fills up all that space. This isn't just happening by accident. It's a direct result of policy decisions, and the only way to push back, to reverse the tide, is with very deliberate countershift planning, basically all-out revitalization efforts. And hey, this is not just some academic theory. This is happening right now. Just look across the Americas. In Guatemala, you've got Mayan languages that have been shifting towards Spanish for centuries. Up in Canada, languages like Cree and Inuktitut are under immense pressure from English and French. It's a similar story all across the Mercosur region. But it's not all doom and gloom. We're also seeing these incredible sparks of hope, these revitalization efforts, things like language immersion schools and bilingual programs that are designed to fight back and keep these languages alive. And now for a bit of a plot twist. Remember Swahili, our hero of national unity from earlier? Well, its success is a total double-edged sword. As it becomes the national language, it puts enormous pressure on all the smaller local languages around it, causing them to shift and begin to fade. It's this huge irony in language planning, right? The very same policy that can bring a nation together can also, unintentionally, wipe out linguistic diversity. So when we pull this all together and look at this table, it becomes super clear that there's no one-size-fits-all story here. Every region we've talked about is dealing with its own unique cocktail of these forces. You've got Guatemala, which is focused on reversing a language shift that's been going on for ages. Meanwhile, Canada is grappling with the daily reality of translanguaging. And then there's Swahili, which is amazing because it's both a product of creolization and a cause of language shift, all at the same time. It just goes to show you policy and practice are in this constant, complicated dance, everywhere you look. So what does this all mean for the future of language? At the end of the day, every single policy, every debate we've touched on, really just boils down to how a society answers one fundamental question about what language is. You can think of language planning as existing on this big spectrum. On one end, you've got the assimilationist view. These folks see a bunch of different languages as a problem that needs to be solved, usually by pushing one single standard language on everyone. But on the other end, you have the pluralist view, which sees that same diversity as an incredible resource, something valuable that should be protected and cultivated. Every single policy we've looked at is basically a society pushing those scales one way or the other. So, if we want a healthy linguistic future, it seems like it's got to be built on three main pillars. Pillar 1, giving legitimacy to new, creolized languages. Pillar 2, changing our approach to teaching, our pedagogy, so that our schools embrace the reality of translanguaging instead of punishing it. And Pillar 3, putting real, active effort into revitalization to support communities that are fighting so hard to save their languages from disappearing. It all connects back. And that really leaves us with this final and I think most important idea. Yeah, top-down government policies have a ton of power, for sure. But ultimately, it's the speakers, it's us, through our daily chats, our advocacy, even our votes, who really shape that policy in the long run. So the question isn't just, what's the future of language going to be? The real question is, what kind of future are you speaking into existence every single day?